Good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha, it's a double Parsha, Parsha Nitzavim-Vayeilech, and we'll be starting from the beginning. This is Perek Chavtes Pasuk Tes, chapter 29, verse 9. Atem Nitzavim-Vayeilech kulchem b'fnei Hashem Elokeichem. You are all standing here today before Hashem, your God. Rasheichem Shivteichem, the heads of your tribes. Zichneichem V'sheitreichem, your elders and your officers. Kol Ish Yisrael, all the men of Israel. Tapchem Neshechem, your children, your wives, of Gerach Hashem B'Kerev Machanecha, and your convert that is within your camp. Mechaitev Eitzecha, from the one who chops your wood, Ad She'ei Memecha, till the one that draws your water. L'Avrecha B'Ris Hashem Elokecha V'Alasai, for you to pass into a covenant of Hashem your God and into His oath. That Hashem your God is making with you today. In order to establish you for Him as a nation today, and He should be for you as God. As He has spoken to you. And He swore to your forefathers, to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It's not with you alone that I am making this treaty and this oath. Rather, it is with the one who is here with us today before God, and with the one that's not with us today. So this is what we're going to focus on, this verse that we just read, where Moshe is saying that the covenant the Jewish people are about to enter, and the oath that the Jewish people are about to enter, which means that they accept to be God's special nation, to observe His mitzvahs, and if they don't, they could be liable to very serious punishment, and if they do, the great reward. This is the covenant and the oath that's being made here, and Moshe is saying the oath is being made with whoever is here today, and with whoever is not here today. Now, what does that mean that they are not here today? Where are they? So Rashi says they haven't been born yet. Eis asher einenu, Rashi says, the one who is not here with us, va'af im doros ha'asidim liyos. This means to include even the future generations. Not only are those present going into this covenant, but even the future generations. That's what it means, the ones who are not with us today. The future of the Jewish people are included in this covenant, even though they're not here today. So the commentary of Sivsei Chachamim, which is a commentary on Rashi, first of all, wants to bring out, how did Rashi know that the words "and the one that is not with us today" is referring to someone who hasn't been born yet? Maybe it means someone who's just not here today. For some reason he's not here with the rest of the Jewish people. He went somewhere, and he'll come back later. Maybe it means that who's included in the covenant, whoever is here, whoever is not here. Doesn't mean they're not born yet. They're just not here. So how did Rashi know it means those who haven't been born yet? So the Sivsei Chachamim explains this in two ways. Number one, we began reading, Atem Nitzavim-Vayeilech kulchem b'fnei Hashem Elokeichem. You are all standing here today. That means you're all here. Everybody is present. Everybody who could be present is present. No one's missing. And therefore, you can't say that which the pasuk means, who is not with us here, means someone who's just not present. Everybody's present. Those are the first words of the Parsha. And therefore, it must mean future generations. Another reason why, says the Sivsei Chachamim, it has to mean, Rashi understood that the words here mean future generations, is because if it meant someone who's not here, you'd have a problem. And the problem would be, is that this accepting of the covenant, this oath, it's an oath. It's the same way a person makes an oath or accepts something upon themselves. They affect some kind of obligation upon themselves. That is what the Jewish people are doing here. Well, if there's someone who needs to accept that, has to accept that covenant, accept that oath, and he's not here, what right do you have to bring him into it? Maybe if he'd be here, he'd say, I don't want it. If it means that we're bringing to the covenant even people who are not present. Well, what right do you have to go ahead and put an oath on someone who's not here? Maybe he's going to say, that means you're assuming he'd be okay with it. Maybe he won't. And therefore, Rashi says, it means future generations. Now, how does that work? Why is that any better? Why is it any better to say that the oath that the people present are making, even now goes on to those not born yet? They're not here either. Why are they any different than the person who is born but just not present? So the Sivsa Chachamim uses a principle that we find. Ki bara kare davuahu. A child is the foot of the father. The child is the extension of the father. The Kamen Sha'avis Kiblu, and once the father is accepted, the children coming afterwards are also included in the covenant. So this concept of bra kara davua, a son is the foot of a father. He's the extension of the father. Means to say that the father makes an oath. The son is an extension of the father, so the father's oath continues with him. Or perhaps it means to say, since it's an extension of the father, he's already within the father, and therefore this oath that's being made can count for him also. So I don't know exactly all the parameters. Can't say right now I have offhand, I know all the parameters of this principle that a child is an extension of the father, but can a father make an oath and say, I want this oath to go on my child who isn't born yet? I don't know. That's not so simple to me. It's not clear to me exactly how this concept, which we do find, would go even that far to say that the father's oath extends to the child. So I want to share with you an answer by Rabbi Yisrael Reisman of Brooklyn, New York. This answer comes from the transcript of a class that he gives, and he explains in the following way. He explains that the bris here, what we have to understand is that when the Jewish people here are accepting upon themselves this oath, it's not we shouldn't see it just as 600,000 individuals together made an oath. We have 600,000 individuals who made an oath together. No. 600,000 Jews, the Jewish nation making an oath and accepting to be a part of a covenant, is a tzibur. It's a community. It's a nation. You know, we talk about a tzibur, which we translate as a community. But, you know, that tzibur means when you have 10 men together, that's a tzibur. That's a tzibur. Use the word quorum because it means 10 people. But the word that's used for once we have 10 men together it's a tzibur. It's not individuals anymore. It's a community. It's a group. It's a unit. It's a unit unto itself. When something is a tzibur, a community, Klal Yisrael is a nation. It's not a bunch of individuals coming together. It's an entity unto itself. Of course, the entity is made up of individuals, but we don't look at it as a lot of individuals together. Rather, it's an entity of the tzibur. It's an entity of the klal, of the community, of the nation. So when the Jewish people here accepted the oath, they were accepting it as a tzibur. It was the entity of the community. It was the entity of the Jewish nation that were accepting this oath. Therefore, said Rabbi Reisman, there is a principle: tzibur lo mes. A community does not die, which means to say that looking at it from the point of the Jewish people, or it can be looked at perhaps on any tzibur, but looking at it from the point of the Jewish people, it means is that the Jewish nation does not change. The Jewish nation, the entity of the Jewish nation remains the same. The faces may change, but the entity is the same. When one person goes and another person replaces them, they're replacing them as in being part of this entity of the Jewish nation. But it's not a turnover. It's not a new nation. It's the same nation, the same entity. Different people are taking place of others in order to have this entity, but it's the same entity. And therefore, when the entity of the Jewish people accepted the covenant, being that the entity of the Jewish people never dies, never ends, it's eternal, then the oath remains, the covenant remains. It's not about a bunch of different people accepting this so that when one dies, he's done and the other person has to accept it upon himself. That's not how it works. The entity of the Jewish people have accepted the covenant. That entity always remains, it's eternal. There are others that are kind of moving in place of others in order to have this entity, but the entity is the same, and it was the entity that accepted, and therefore it's the entity that retains that covenant forever. This is a concept that we need to say also when it comes to accepting of the Torah. That generation accepted the Torah. How did it now carry on to the next generation? It'd be the same idea. It's the nation that accepted, and the nation doesn't die. The nation is eternal. It stays forever. That is how it's possible to say that those who are not yet born, the Torah, it went on them. It continues on to them. It continues on to them because they will become part of that entity. And because they become part of that entity, and that entity accepted the covenant, it goes on to them. And Rabbi Reisman gives other examples of this. And again, I'm explaining it to you the way I understand it. We know there is a concept that if a person makes a vow, or a person makes an oath, that there are circumstances in which they can annul it. In order to annul it, you have to go to a rabbinical court for them to annul it for you. And the rule is that you cannot send an agent to annul your vow. For some reason you can't make it to the Beis Din, so you send someone as an agent for you to go ahead and do the annulment for you. We have a concept of shlichus. You can send an agent to do things for you. You want to acquire something. I can appoint someone to be an agent to acquire something for me. We find this concept throughout, but it doesn't work by annulling a vow. If you need to annul a vow or an oath, you yourself have to go and do that annulment, get that annulment. It cannot be done through an agent. The only situation where you can do an annulment of a vow for someone else is for your wife. Because when it comes to a wife, ishtay kagufay, one's wife is like the person himself, and therefore he could do an annulment of the vows for her. He could go for her to the Beis Din rabbinical court and gain the annulment through them. Okay. With that in mind, the Rabbi Moshe Sofer, the famous Chassam Sofer, was asked the following question. There was a community, a city, that made some kind of acceptance, some kind of an oath regarding something. And over time, they wanted to not have to keep that oath anymore. They wanted to change it. And they were able halachically to change it. The question that was posed to the Chassam Sofer was, does every person in this city have to go and stand in front of the Beis Din and get the annulment? I mean, after all, the whole city accepted. They now wanted to change. So, you can't make an agent to annul a vow or to annul an oath. So does the whole city now have to go in front of the Beis Din in order to get that annulment? So the Chassam Sofer said no. The Chassam Sofer said no because when a city made this oath together, it wasn't individuals who made the oath. It was the tzibur. It was the community. This community together as a community made that oath. So it's not individuals who made the oath. It's a community that made the oath. It's the entity of a tzibur, of a community that made an oath. And in that situation, one person can be a representative of the rest. Now, I think this needs a little bit of explanation because, what's the idea behind this? Is the idea behind this, an individual can't send an agent to annul his vow, but a community can. Why? Because the rule was only set by an individual that an agent can't, but for a community he could. So I'd like to try to give a little bit more explanation to it. I hope it'll be it'll be clear and adds more to it. But the point would be is that being that we look at the tzibur, at this city, this community as an entity, and every person is a part of that entity, so then it's like automatically I can represent the community. An agent means an agent means there's an individual who has the power to do things, and you can't do that for me because you're not me unless I make you an agent. And then you take on my powers. That's what the Torah allows us to do. You don't have to do that here. You don't need the power of the community can lie in one part of it. Now, of course, the community has to agree to it. They have to agree to doing it. But the power to act on behalf of the community doesn't need this official appointment of an agent. They don't need to invest their power into the agent. He automatically has it. He is part of the community. He's part of it. And because he's part of the community, therefore automatically has the power of the community. He doesn't need an official appointment to be invested with the power of the community. He is the community. He's part of that community. He's part of that entity. And therefore he has the power to do it. Of course, he can't do it against their will. They have to agree to it. But the reason why you can have a representative in this kind of case is because the representative who is part of this entity, he makes up this entity, he has the power, he automatically has the power of the community to be able to represent it, even in the case of annulling a vow. All right, that's one example Rabbi Reisman gives to bring out this idea. That's another example. Here's another example he uses. It's a very interesting idea. So we know there is a concept of karbanos sibur, of communal sacrifices. We have communal sacrifices. There's the daily, there's the tamid sacrifice, the continuous sacrifice every day, twice a day. We have musafin, additional sacrifices on Shabbos and Yontif. Yom Kippur, we have a communal sin offering for the Jewish people. There are many different communal sacrifices. Now, the Jewish people, if you want to be included in the communal sacrifice, you've got to give a half a shekel. Half a shekel was collected every year in the month of Adar in order so that for the coming fiscal year of communal sacrifice that starts in the month of Nisan, that you should be included. You want to be included in the communal sacrifices, you need to give a half a shekel. And that contribution now gives you your share. Now, there is a rule that if you have an animal that was set aside as a sacrifice and its owner died, so let's say you have a sin offering and the owner died. So somebody else says, oh, I'll use it for my sin offering. Can't do that. A sin offering that its owner died is invalid. You can't use the animal anymore for a sacrifice. Now, if that is so let's think about something. The Jewish people are all seemingly partners in the communal sacrifice. Now, when Yom Kippur comes, so we say the fiscal year for the communal sacrifices starts in the month of Nisan. 6 months later on Yom Kippur, a little bit more than 6 months later on Yom Kippur, there's going to be a communal sin offering, a sin offering brought for the Jewish people. Somebody probably died in between Nisan and Yom Kippur. Why do we not have a problem of a chatas? Oh, I'm sorry, I missed something. Sorry. Now, I mentioned before that if the owner dies, that the sacrifice is no good. And if, let's say, they were partners, you think it's possible to be partners in a sacrifice. And let's say one of the partners dies, that's it. It's considered the owner died. There's still an owner, but one of the owners died. That invalidates the whole sacrifice, even for the one, it invalidates the sacrifice. Okay, so now with that in mind, the Jewish people all contribute to the communal sacrifice. They're all partners in the communal sacrifice. If one of them dies before the communal sacrifice is brought, why don't we have a problem like we just mentioned? When people are partners in a sacrifice, and one of them dies, that's an example of a sin offering whose owner died. So why don't we have that here? Somebody must have died before Yom Kippur. Why do we have a problem that one of the partners died? It should invalidate the sacrifice. The answer is that we're not partners in communal sacrifice, but rather The communal sacrifice is the community sacrifice. The entity of the community, the entity of the nation. This is the nation sacrifice. Now, if you want to be able to be on the nation sacrifice, you have to give a half a shekel. You have to contribute towards it. But in essence, it's not a sacrifice of many individuals together, but rather it's the sacrifice of the entity of the tzibur. It's a sacrifice of the entity of the community. And that community doesn't die. One person dies, he's still the entity of the community. And because of the fact that we see as the tzibur as an entity unto itself, therefore we don't have a problem of one of the partners dying. There's no partnership here. It's the sacrifice of the community. It's a sacrifice of the nation, of the entity of the Jewish people. And that entity is eternal, doesn't die, never ends. And therefore, says Rabbi Reisman, this is how we would understand Rashi. When Rashi tells us that what's happening here is that the Moshe Rabbeinu says the covenant is being made with those who are here and with those who are not here. So Rashi says those who are not here means those who aren't born yet. So the first question is, maybe it means somebody who's not present. So for that, we'll say the Sifsach Chachamim answered, the Parsha already began. You're all standing here before Hashem. And if you're all standing here before Hashem, that means you're all present. So who's not present? It means the future generations. How is it possible to put an oath on someone who's not here yet? The answer is because this oath of the Jewish people was not an oath of many individuals. Rather, it was the oath of the tzibur. It was the oath of the community. It was the oath of the nation, of the entity of the nation, of the Jewish people. And that entity never changes, never goes away. It's not like the nation changes over and over as generations go on. The nation, the entity of the nation remains the same. The faces change. The people that make it up change, but not the entity. And therefore, the oath that was accepted by this entity the first time is an oath that remains with the entity forever because the entity remains forever. And that's the explanation to this Rashi. Very, very interesting and fascinating and important concept. Okay. Next thing I want to share with you is a very interesting comment from the Meshech Chochmah. The Meshech Chochmah is going on a pasuk in the sect. This is a double parsha this week. This is in pasuk. This is in Parshas Vayeilech. No, I'm sorry. My mistake. Sorry. It's in Parshas Nitzavim. It's actually a continuation from what we just read. I apologize. Okay. The Parsha said there's a covenant being made with everybody. And this is now Pasuk Tesvav, verse 15. You know how we lived in the land of Egypt, and how you went past through nations. But you saw their abominations, and their detestable idols. Eitz v'even, made of wood and stone, kesef v'zav, silver and gold, asher imoim, that was with them. Penyesh b'chem ish or isha mishpacha ishevet. Lest there be amongst you a man or a woman or a family or a tribe, asher levavai panei hayim Hashem Elokeinu, whose heart is straying today from Hashem our God, v'lechas la'avodas Elohei goyim haim, to go and to worship the gods of those nations. We'll skip a few words. Now this person who's already thinking about going to worship idols, and he hears the words of this oath. The oath is referring to last week's Parsha, Parshas Kisavai, where we had the whole litany of punishments and suffering the Jewish people will experience if they abandon God. Now, this person, he's thinking about going to worship idols, but he just heard that whole list of curses, that whole list of problems, the whole list of punishments. What's he going to do with it? So, and when he hears the words of this oath, he will bless himself, saying, everything will still be peaceful for me if I follow my heart's desires. Thereby adding the drunk with the thirsty. So what that means is like this. This person wants to worship idols, but he just heard all the punishments. So what's he going to say? It'll be fine. It'll be good. Don't worry. It's going to be good. He's just going to talk himself into the fact that he'll survive it all. He'll be fine when he does whatever he wants. Now that the Pasuk says, thereby adding the drunk with the thirsty. What that means is, Rashi explains that to mean that when a person does this, what happens is that not only will I punish him for the intentional sins that he did, but I will also punish him for the intentional sins that he did. That's adding the drunk with the thirsty. Basically, the thirsty is the intentional sins. The drunk means you're already, it's done already. But the point is they were done unintentionally. By having this attitude and going forward, it brings upon himself even more punishment, even punishment from other things that he did previously. Now, so the pasuk is talking about how the person says he decided that, there was a Yetzar, there was a strong desire to worship idols in these times. And the person is going to say, that's where I want to go. What do I do with all the curses? Don't worry about it, it'll be fine. And by doing so, he adds more punishment onto the sins that he commits. More than just the intentional sins that he's committing now, but even for unintentional sins that he committed before. The Meshech Chachma, the Kamti Meshech Chachma, explains, he explains these words. He calls it a homiletical interpretation, but this is how he goes through it. And he's saying like this. This is the kind of person who has the following attitude. And his attitude may seem a bit extreme. I don't know how many people actually do this or would even contemplating doing it this at the extreme that the Meshech Chachma is saying, but it rings true in a big way, in the way we do things. So he says, imagine a person who says like this, you're telling me I should worship God, and so how should I worship God? I should basically, don't go anywhere that I'm not supposed to. Don't see anything around that I'm not supposed to. Kind of, close myself up in my house, shut the blinds, learn Torah, daven, cling to Hashem, and that's what I should do. What's the point to that? If that's what you do, then serving God is simple. There's no challenge to that. What are you showing God that you're really loyal like that? By basically putting yourself in a situation that you have no temptations? You want to really show God that you love him? You want to really gain reward for it? You want to really accomplish serving God and showing your dedication to God? You should go where you shouldn't go. You should go and see the kinds of things that will arouse your desires. And the desires are going to be great, but you're going to control yourself. For the sake of God, you're going to hold yourself back. That's going to show loyalty to God. That's real loyalty. Not when you hide from everything, but rather when you confront everything and you stand up to it. That's the true service of God. Now, the Meshech Chachma fits this into the words. What are the words? The words go like this. I'm sure I have this right. Right. So the person says, when he hears the words of this curse, he's going to say in his heart, Shalom Ali. So Shalom, we explain for us peace. And he's going to say everything's going to be okay. The word Shalom is related to the word Shalem, means complete. The two words are related to each other. So Shalom Ali means, he says, there's a person straying, he's considering going afterward or worshiping idols. And even though he heard about the punishment that could happen for that, but his desire is Shalom Ali. I want to be complete. I want to be whole. I want to be perfect. I want to reach high levels of dedication to God. And how that's going to happen? Nitzavim-Vayeilech, because I'm going to follow my desires. But I'm going to, of course, I'm going to control myself. So that I should add the drunk to the thirsty means like this. For many people, there are certain things that are sins, but they're not really challenges. For a person who's grown up always eating kosher, pork is not a challenge. It's not. So that this person with his way of thinking is saying, well, if it's not a challenge, I'm not going to have much reward. But if I follow the desires of my heart and I start working up my desires, I'll start desiring pork too, and I'll get rewarded for that also now. So by following the desires of my heart and building up my desires, I'll even get rewarded now for the kinds of things I wouldn't have had a desire for before. That's what this person wants to do. So what's the response to that? That's the next pasuk. Hashem will not forgive that person. You're making a big mistake. When that's your attitude, inevitably you will fall. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that you can play at the edges and get everything worked up inside yourself and then conquer it. Hashem doesn't forgive you for that. That's a completely misguided way of thinking. And actually, the Meshech Chochmah points out that this is the meaning of the Sifri. The Sifri is a form of Medrash that quotes a pasuk that says, "V'sartem min haderech," you will stray from the path, "L'lechas la'avoid Elohim acherim," to go and to worship other gods. Now, the wording means you'll stray from the path to worship. How are you straying from the path? To worship. But you don't really need those words to stray from the path to say to worship. And therefore, the Sifri says, once you stray from the path, shuv atem oivdim, it's inevitable that you're going to serve. What does this medrash mean? Medrash means, says the Meshech Chochmah, what he just said. You're straying from the path. Means to say you're not worshiping the idols, but you're straying from the path. You're getting close. You're getting close to it. You're seeing it. You're allowing it to tempt you. Now, in the Meshech Chochmah's case, the person is doing it because he wants to show his dedication to God. Whatever your intention is while you're doing it, once you stray, if you stray from the path, you start straying towards idol worship, you're going to worship idols. It doesn't work that way. And whatever intentions you may have had, whatever good intentions you talk yourself into, isn't going to help you. It's a totally misguided concept. And therefore, Hashem will not forgive you for this kind of approach and for the inevitable consequences, the inevitable actions, inevitable sins that come from it. So, as I mentioned before, I don't know how many people go as far as the Meshech Chochmah's example, but there are clearly all of us do this in some way or another, that we play at the edges, that we say, we're not going to do this wrong thing, but we don't have to stay away that far from it. I'm not going to look at anything wrong with a computer, but, sometimes you get a little bit too close to it. But we say, no, but I know I'm close to it, but I'm not going to do it. It's a big mistake. It's a big mistake. It's not wrong for people to be careful. If you're careful, it means you care that you don't want to sin. And being careful means that you don't play at the edges, talking it into yourself that nothing's going to happen. It's all right. Nothing's going to happen. Because once we stray from the path, once we start getting near the temptation, we're putting ourselves in big trouble. And therefore, the proper path is to be careful. It's inevitable that there are going to be temptations that we deal with. That's inevitable. That's life. That's what we're here in life for, is to deal with that. If Hashem sends us challenges, and we have to deal with those challenges, and when we deal with those challenges, that's what gives us our greatness. That's why Hashem rewards us, because we deal with challenges. But we don't put ourselves in a situation of a challenge. And in the Meshech Chochmah case, this person is making this whole from calculation. We don't go that far. But the idea is all the same. We don't go that far, and meaning we play at the edges without this calculation of, this will be the way that I'll serve God. Our calculation is, it's all right to go here. I won't go any further. True care of observance of the Torah, true what we call Yirah Shamayim, true fear of God, True respect to God, true respect to the Torah means that I don't put myself in a challenging situation. I don't just say, it's okay, I can go this far, I won't go further. That's a very dangerous path. That is the path the Meshech Chochmah says we alluded to in this week's Parsha. But if we truly care to observe the Torah, we'll be careful not to stray towards it. We'll be careful not to put ourselves in the line of temptation. That is the truest sense of what it means to be God-fearing, what it means to want to serve Hashem. Have a good night.